Hey everyone! This is a quick reminder to subscribe and hit that like button. It lets me know that you are enjoying my content. Also, feel free to drop your suggestions for future stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and let's dive right in. Diary entry, Day 1. Never in a million years did I think receiving an emergency alert, "The sky has changed," was even possible, but it was, and it all started like this. It was cold when I left my apartment this morning. That sharp, dry kind of February cold that makes your breath hang in the air like smoke. My boots crunched over the packed-down snow, my fingers stiff even inside my gloves. Nothing felt out of place. I walked my usual route, passing the coffee shop on the corner, debating whether I should stop in or suffer through the morning without caffeine. The sky was a dull, pale gray, the way it always was in winter. I was already dreading another long day at work, already thinking about when I could come back home and crawl under a blanket. And then, a blip. I don't know how else to describe it. For a fraction of a second, everything around me vanished. Not a blackout, not a momentary flicker of darkness. It was like the world itself had been erased. I wasn't blind, I just wasn't anywhere. And then, just as fast, it was back. The street, the buildings, the cars, the people walking past me, all exactly where they should be. But something had changed. The air was warm. Not just a little warm, not like a random gust of unseasonal wind. I mean, the bite of winter was gone. The kind of warmth you only feel in late March or early April, when the ice finally starts breaking and you can smell the first hints of damp earth beneath the snow. But this wasn't March. This was February, and the snow was melting. I looked down at the sidewalk, at the thin streams of water trickling past my boots. My heart stuttered. A minute ago, everything had been frozen solid, and now it was dripping. I looked up. That's when I saw the sky. At first, I thought it was just a particularly bright sunset. Deep pink and red hues bled across the clouds, casting an eerie glow over everything. It was beautiful in a way, but something was wrong with it. It wasn't sunset. It was the middle of the damn day. There was no setting sun, no horizon dipped in golden light, just a sky that shouldn't look like this. Other people noticed it too. They were staring up, whispering. Some had their phones out taking pictures, scrolling through their feeds with increasingly concerned expressions. A few were still walking normally, heads down, earbuds in, oblivious to whatever had just happened. But not many. I didn't stop walking, but my stomach felt tight. I could feel something buzzing under my skin, something instinctual, like the slow-building fear of standing at the edge of a cliff. By the time I got to the office, the mood had shifted. The usual morning chatter was gone. My coworkers sat silent, huddled around their desks, eyes glued to screens. Someone had turned the radio on in the break room, the muffled voices of news anchors drifting into the quiet air. I dumped my bag onto my desk and turned to Claire, one of my closest work friends. She looked pale. "What's going on?" I asked. She didn't answer at first, just tilted her phone screen toward me. It was a live stream of the news. I leaned in, trying to focus. The anchor was talking quickly, voice clipped and serious. A split screen showed video footage from around the world. The same pink-red sky stretched over Paris, over Tokyo, over Cairo, and then I saw the headlines. "Moon disappears from sky over Eastern Hemisphere." People report never-before-seen constellations in Europe, Asia. Governments have not released an official statement. My throat felt dry. "Wait, what do they mean the moon disappeared?" I asked. "People saw it vanish," Claire muttered. "Like, 1 second it was there, and then it wasn't. No clouds, no nothing, just gone." I swallowed hard, turning back to my own phone. Twitter was blowing up. "Guys, I swear I just saw the moon blink out of existence. Am I going crazy, or do the stars look different? This isn't normal. The sky is broken." And then, just as I was about to check for updates from NASA, my phone buzzed. The sound of notifications exploded across the office, every phone buzzing at once. Claire looked down, her face draining of color. I grabbed my phone, my heart hammering. The screen was glowing with a government-issued alert. "Emergency alert. The sky has changed." That was it. No explanation, no instructions. Just that one sentence. The silence in the office turned absolute. I could hear the radio in the break room crackling, the sound of the news anchor stammering as they tried to keep up with incoming reports. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then, panic. People scrambled for answers, grabbing their phones, checking every possible news source, trying to understand what the hell was happening. Claire was frantically typing into Google. Someone else tried calling their family, but the lines were busy. Twitter was on fire now. WTF does this mean? NASA needs to say something. This isn't normal. Is anyone else feeling weird? I swear my head is pounding. An hour passed, no one worked. No one even pretended to. And then, emergency alert, stay inside. Further instructions will follow. My chest tightened, I grabbed my coat, my hands shaking. I needed to get home. Nobody stopped me. People were already leaving, faces pale, eyes darting toward the windows. Outside, the sky was still that deep, eerie pink. The warmth in the air felt heavier now, suffocating. I walked fast, nearly ran. By the time I got home, my fingers were trembling so badly that I nearly dropped my keys. I locked the door, bolted it for good measure. My apartment was silent, just the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I turned on the TV. Every channel was the same. Scientists were baffled. No one knew what was happening. Governments were monitoring the situation. But I already knew something deep in my gut. This wasn't a normal event. This wasn't some solar anomaly or rare atmospheric shift. Something had happened to us. And whoever was responsible hadn't asked for our permission. Diary entry, day 1 evening, and day 2, I didn't move from the couch for hours. The emergency alert still sat on my phone screen, glowing back at me like some kind of sick joke. I kept waiting for another one, something, anything, that would tell me what the hell was going on. But nothing came. Just the same vague warnings on TV, the same pale-faced news anchors, the same scientists scrambling for answers they didn't have. The sky had changed. The world had changed. And no one knew why. It was night now, but it wasn't dark. The sky never turned blue again. It had bled into deeper shades, pink fading into sickly reds and purples, swirling like some unnatural oil painting. It was like being trapped in an eternal sunset, except there was no comfort in it. It didn't make sense. Sunsets only happen when the sun is setting. But this never faded. It hung over us like a bruise on the atmosphere, casting everything in its eerie glow. Streetlights were still on, but they didn't feel necessary. The air had a weird kind of brightness to it, an unnatural illumination that made the world feel off. And it was warm. Too warm. I cracked the window open, and a rush of thick, humid air hit me in the face. It was the middle of February, but the outside felt like May. I leaned out slightly, breathing in the wrongness of it all. The snow that had been piled along the sidewalks just hours ago? Gone. Melted away like it had never existed. I reached for my phone, opening Twitter. It was worse than before. Every trending topic was the same. The sky isn't changing back. It's summer in February. There are planets in the sky that shouldn't be there. The moon is gone. I scrolled, my heart climbing into my throat. People were posting pictures, not just of the sky, but of things that shouldn't be there. Where the moon should be, there's nothing, just a black void. It was there, and then it wasn't. What do you mean the stars are different? The worst part, scientists didn't have answers. According to early reports, Earth's axial tilt was wrong, our orbit was wrong, our place in space was wrong. The universe wasn't the same. I couldn't stay inside anymore. I needed to see it for myself. I grabbed my hoodie and stepped out onto my apartment balcony. The warmth was suffocating. Thick in a way February air had no right to be. And then, I looked up, and I saw it. A planet. Close. Too close. It hadn't been there before. I stood there, frozen, as my mind struggled to make sense of it. It was so massive that I could see its surface, the way its oceans shimmered, the way its land masses curved along its shape. I could see storms moving across it, thick clouds swirling over its atmosphere. It was impossibly detailed, like the Earth had gained a new neighbor overnight. A sick, horrible thought wormed its way into my brain. We aren't where we're supposed to be. The realization hit so hard that I stumbled backward, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. I shut the drapes, fast, as if that would make it go away. As if any of this could be undone. I didn't sleep. At some point I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, my phone buzzed with a message. Boss, work is canceled until further notice. Stay home. I sat up, heart pounding. It wasn't just me. I grabbed my phone, checked my notifications. Every group chat I was in was silent, like no one knew what to say. I got out of bed, hands shaking as I pulled back the curtains. The sky was still red. Not as deep as last night, but still wrong. The city looked empty, too still. I threw on my shoes, grabbed my bag, and stepped outside. The first thing I noticed, everything was closed. Every store, every gas station, every business on my block. No open signs, no movement inside, just dark windows and locked doors. For the first time, I truly felt it. The world wasn't ours anymore, and I had no idea what was coming next. Diary entry, Day 2 and Day 3. I couldn't stay here. That much was obvious the moment I stepped outside. The world felt abandoned. It wasn't just the empty stores or the silent streets. It was something deeper, something invisible, like the air itself knew it was in the wrong place, like it was waiting for us to realize it too. I stood on the sidewalk, my breath coming slow and shaky as I took it all in. The pinkish-red sky still loomed overhead, its eerie glow stretching over the city like a dying ember. I saw a few people here and there, moving quickly, looking over their shoulders as if expecting something to come crawling out of the sky. I pulled out my phone. Text from Mom. Come home. Your sister and her family are already on their way. Just get here safe. I didn't need to be told twice. I went inside, grabbed everything I could fit into a bag, and got the hell out of there. The drive was surreal. The farther I got from the city, the stranger everything became. Gas stations were packed, lines of people standing outside, carts and baskets overflowing with supplies, water, batteries, canned food, anything they could carry. The inside of the stores were ransacked, aisles torn apart like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. But the worst part? There were no police, no officials, no government workers, no attempt at controlling the chaos. Whatever was happening, whatever they knew, they weren't telling us. I kept driving. I tried not to think about why that was. Tried not to wonder how many never made it this far. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, I was shaking. The house stood exactly as I remembered it. 2 stories, a wraparound porch, wind chimes swaying softly in the unnatural warmth of the evening. A place that had always meant safety. My sister's car was already there. And when my mom opened the door, I felt something in my chest unclench for the first time in 24 hours. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled me into a tight hug, holding on like she thought I might slip through her fingers if she let go. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wouldn't. That night, we tried to pretend things were normal. We sat around the kitchen table drinking tea, the TV murmuring in the background. My sister, her husband, their 2 kids. All of us pretending. Pretending like the sky wasn't bleeding. Pretending like the world hadn't changed forever. But we weren't fooling anyone. Dad set up his telescope after dinner. He barely spoke all evening, but I could see the worry in his face, the way his hands fidgeted with his mug, the way his eyes kept flicking to the window. My dad wasn't just anybody. He had spent his entire career working for NASA. He had spent decades studying the sky, and now, the sky wasn't the same. I followed him out onto the porch, watching as he adjusted the telescope, pointing it upward into the abyss. His face was grim when he pulled away. "Come look," he murmured. I hesitated, but then I stepped forward. I pressed my eye to the lens, and I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. The stars? They were wrong. I felt a deep, sickening dread creep through me. Nothing was where it should be. I pulled back sharply, my throat tight. "Dad," I whispered. "Where the hell are we?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then finally he sighed. "We're in a different part of the universe," he said. I stared at him, heart pounding. That's impossible. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. Because I had already seen the truth. The constellations, unrecognizable. The moon, gone. The sun, too big, too red. We weren't where we were supposed to be, and someone or something had put us here. Diary entry, Day 4 to Day 6. I barely slept. Not that it mattered. Night didn't feel like night anymore. There was no comforting darkness, no familiar black sky dotted with the constellations I had grown up with. Just endless, suffocating red. Even when the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky still glowed. Not with moonlight, not with stars, but with something else entirely. Something wrong. Day 4, the news kept getting worse. Flooding, melting glaciers. Disaster creeping in from all sides. The reporters on TV sounded like they were running out of things to say. Every update was the same. Sea levels are rising at an alarming rate. Satellite images confirm the Antarctic ice sheet is collapsing. This event defies all known natural phenomena. I kept thinking about the snow I had seen melting on the sidewalk just days ago. It seemed so small now. Because if this was happening everywhere, if the ice caps were vanishing, if entire coastlines were disappearing underwater, then Earth wasn't just changing, it was dying. Day 5. Dad spent most of the day on the porch, watching the sky. He barely spoke, barely ate, barely even blinked. Just kept adjusting his telescope, taking notes, muttering under his breath. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. I finally sat down beside him, hugging my knees to my chest. "They're saying it on the news now," I murmured. "That we're not where we're supposed to be." Dad exhaled slowly, setting his notebook aside. "They're right." He didn't sound surprised. He sounded tired. I hesitated. "Do you have a theory?" He rubbed his face, then gestured toward the telescope. "See for yourself." I leaned forward, pressing my eye to the lens. The unknown planet loomed, bigger than the moon ever was, hanging like a goddamn omen in the sky. I could see it in terrifying detail. Its oceans, its continents, the way its clouds drifted in thick swirling masses. And yet, that wasn't the worst part. I pulled away, glancing at my dad. "There are no stars," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "Not ones we recognize, no." That deep, sickening dread settled in my stomach again. No stars meant no familiar constellations. No constellations meant we weren't in the same place anymore. "Eden," Dad said carefully, watching my face. "We were moved." I let out a breath, like I had known it all along. "But why?" I asked. "Who would?" "Not who," he interrupted. "Why?" His eyes flicked back to the planet overhead, then to the too red sun, still too large, too close, too hot. "I think we were moved to escape something," he murmured. I stared at him. "Escape what?" He turned back to his notebook, flipping through the pages with a haunted expression. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever it was," he looked at me then, his face grim, voice quiet. "It had to be bad enough that someone moved an entire planet to get away from it." Day 6. It was hotter today. Not by much, but enough to notice. The air had a sticky thickness to it, like the heat was pressing down, settling into our bones. I checked my phone. News reports were worse than before. Floodwaters are rising faster than expected. Cities along the coast are already being evacuated. Something is happening with the sun. I looked out the window. Dad's words from last night echoed in my head. We were moved to escape something. I turned my gaze to the massive planet overhead, watching, waiting, like it already knew the truth, like it had always been waiting for us to figure it out. Diary entry, Day 7 to Day 9. I was pouring coffee when they came. It was early. Not quite morning, not quite night, but that didn't mean anything anymore. Days and nights blurred together in a way that made my stomach turn. The news still droned on from the living room, reports growing more frantic by the hour. The flooding was worse. The heat wave had spread globally. The sky still bled that perpetual red-pink glow. And then, just as I was bringing my mug to my lips, a car door slammed outside. I froze. A second later, Mom peeked in from the hall, her face pale. "Eden," she said quietly, "there's someone here." The moment I stepped onto the porch, I knew they weren't just anyone. 3 men, 2 in dark suits, 1 in a military uniform. They stood by a black SUV, the kind with tinted windows and no license plates. Government. Or something worse. Dad was already talking to them, arms crossed, his face unreadable. One of the men turned toward me, his gaze sharp and assessing. I didn't like the way he looked at me, like I was a piece of the puzzle he was trying to fit into place. "We need your father," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "He's being asked to return to work." Asked, not ordered, not requested. It was a word that gave the illusion of choice. Day 7. "You can say no, right?" I asked. Dad rubbed his temples. "I don't think it's that simple." We were inside now, the men waiting patiently outside, like they already knew what the answer would be. Mom sat at the table, arms folded tightly across her chest. "They didn't tell you anything?" she asked. "They didn't have to," Dad muttered. "It's obvious what they want. Because who better to study a changed world than the man who had spent his life mapping the stars?" I glanced at my sister. She looked as unsettled as I felt. Then I looked at Dad. I saw it in his face. The same expression he had when I was a kid, and he'd spend long nights at his telescope, chasing something just out of reach. He wanted to go, not because they were asking, but because he needed to know. Finally, he exhaled, rubbing his chin. "I'll go," he said. Then, after a beat, But I'm not leaving my family behind. Day 8, the next morning we packed our things, only what we could carry. No time for anything else. The men didn't say where we were going, just that it was safe. That was the word they kept using. Safe. Not permanent, not home, just safe. We drove for hours, farther from civilization, farther into the unknown. I watched through the window as towns thinned out, roads emptied, signs disappeared. Eventually we reached a fence, tall, barbed, lined with cameras. Beyond it, a facility, a high-security research base, tucked away where no one would find it. Or maybe where no one was supposed to leave. Everything inside was sterile and cold. White walls, fluorescent lights, the faint hum of machines working overtime. People in lab coats hurried from room to room, their faces pinched with stress. Some glanced up as we passed, recognizing my father immediately. He belonged here. I didn't. We were led to a conference room, where a group of scientists and officials waited. And then, finally, we got answers. Day 9. The new sun is too hot, one of the scientists said. It's pushing Earth toward rapid climate destabilization. I looked at the monitors behind her, showing graphs, temperature spikes, satellite images of shrinking ice caps. It's not just the heat, another added. The days are shorter. Dad rubbed his chin. It makes sense, he murmured. If we were moved, our rotational speed could have changed. Someone clicked a remote. A diagram of Earth's orbit appeared on the screen, but it wasn't Earth's old orbit. It was something new. Earth is completing a full rotation every 18 hours. I stared at him. That's impossible. He shook his head. It's not. It just means time itself is different now. 18-hour days, less time for everything, less time to work, less time to sleep, less time to live. I suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. I turned toward the windows, toward the crimson sky outside. Time was breaking, and we were breaking with it. Diary entry. Day 10 to day 12. I didn't feel time passing the way I used to. It was like my body still clung to the old rhythm, expecting 24 hours of light and darkness. But now the sun rose and fell too quickly, the sky shifting from red to black and back again in a matter of hours. 18-hour days. The world had been thrown into fast forward, and we were expected to keep up. I wasn't sure we could. Day 10, Dad and the other scientists had been working around the clock. Not that clocks meant much anymore. The base felt like a pressure cooker, buzzing with too many people working on too many questions they didn't have answers to. And then, suddenly, they did. I was sitting in the mess hall when Dad found me. His expression was unreadable. Not quite fear, not quite relief. Somewhere in between. "We need to talk," he said. 5 words, that was all. And just like that, the world was about to change again. The conference room was packed. Screens covered every wall, showing charts, heat maps, satellite footage. A digital simulation of Earth's orbit looped silently, glowing red like a dying ember. Someone cleared their throat. One of the lead scientists, a woman whose name I had already forgotten. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. "We know what happened," she said. The room went silent. I swallowed hard. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She took a breath, paused, then, "Our original sun was seconds away from a mega flare." The words hit like a physical force. Someone in the back of the room sucked in a breath. Seconds away. Not minutes, not hours, not days, seconds. I gripped the edge of the table, my stomach twisting. "That's catastrophic," Dad finished for me. His voice was quiet. A flare like that would have wiped us out, instantly. I felt cold, even in the unnatural warmth of this new world. "So?" My voice came out unsteady. "We should all be dead." The scientist nodded. "Yes." I let out a slow, shaky breath. "Then how are we not?" She turned to the screen, clicking to a new slide. A side-by-side comparison of Earth's old orbit and Earth's new orbit appeared. Something had moved us. Not just out of the way, not just a little, across the universe. A silence thicker than gravity settled over the room. Day 11, I wanted to believe it was over, that we were safe, that the worst had already happened. But the worst was still coming. We had been saved, but at a cost. This sun, the red giant we now orbited, was too strong. It was already warming the planet at an alarming rate. The polar ice caps were nearly gone. Coastal cities were flooding faster than evacuation efforts could keep up. Weather patterns were shifting, becoming unpredictable. Earth wasn't meant to be here. Not this close to this sun, and that meant, in time, it wouldn't survive. Dad's voice was quiet but firm as he explained it to me later that night. If we stay here, the water will eventually evaporate, he said. It might take thousands of years, but it'll happen. He nodded. Earth is dying, Eden, slowly but inevitably. I stared at him, my heart pounding. Then what the hell are we supposed to do? Dad glanced out the window, and that's when I knew. I knew what he was going to say before he even said it. Day 12. The planet next to us, the one that loomed impossibly close every night, the one that felt like it was watching, waiting. It was habitable. The tests had confirmed it. Oxygen, water, a livable atmosphere. Someone had left it here for us. Someone had saved us from destruction, and then given us a way to keep surviving. But why? Who were they? And more importantly, would they come back? I laid awake that night, staring at the red-tinted ceiling, my mind spiraling. We weren't just victims of circumstance. We weren't just lucky. This wasn't random. Someone had intervened. Someone had made a decision. To save us. To move us. To leave us a new home. And no matter how many scientific explanations they gave me, I couldn't shake the feeling that one day, whoever they were would want to check in on us. And when they did, I wasn't sure we'd like the answer. Diary entry, day 13 and day 14. I don't know what normal means anymore. I wake up and the sky is red. I go to sleep and the sky is red. The clocks say time is moving forward, but it feels like we're stuck in place, floating in someone else's version of reality. And yet, people are adapting. Because what else is there to do? Day 13. The base has settled into routine. Scientists keep working. Military keeps patrolling. The air hums with the quiet buzz of people trying to keep the world from falling apart. 18-hour days are just life now. Work cycles have shifted. You either adjust or get left behind. Meals are scheduled differently. Morning, noon, and night don't exist. Just 3 meals in a loop. People sleep in shifts. Some get 6 hours, some get 4. No one really feels rested anymore. I overheard one of the scientists say that babies born here will never know what 24 hours felt like. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't temporary. This was forever. Day 14. They're preparing the mission. Not everyone knows about it yet, but Dad does. They want to start colonizing the new planet. I don't blame them. Earth is burning slowly, and the scientists are desperate for solutions. Some are working on climate stabilization efforts, but deep down, everyone knows the truth. This place isn't meant to be home anymore. So they're putting together the first expedition team, engineers, biologists, physicists, people who can build, people who can adapt. The first people who will set foot on the new world. Dad took me outside tonight. Away from the bright lights, away from the base, away from the constant hum of trying to survive. He set up his telescope. "Look," he said, nodding toward the sky. I hesitated, because I already knew what I would see. I had seen it every night. Still, I leaned in, and there it was, the planet. The one that loomed impossibly close, hanging over us like an unspoken promise, a world waiting to be claimed, waiting for us, waiting because it had been left there. Whoever moved us, whoever decided we were worth saving, had made sure we wouldn't be stranded. And yet as I stared at it, at its swirling oceans and unfamiliar continents, I felt something deep in my gut, something that didn't feel like relief. Because we weren't alone. We had never been alone. And someday, whoever left us this planet, they might come back to check on their work. And when they do, will they be happy with what they find? Diary entry, final entry. Dad hasn't been sleeping. I hear him at night, pacing the halls, muttering to himself, papers rustling as he runs calculations over and over. It reminds me of when I was a kid, how he'd stay up late working on astronomical models, tracing the sky with his telescope, always searching for something. But this isn't like before. This time, he found something. It started 3 nights ago. Dad had been analyzing the new constellations, mapping them out, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar sky. At first, he thought they were random, just a scattered arrangement of stars in a part of the universe that wasn't meant to be ours. But something wasn't right. The patterns were too perfect. I was lying in bed when he came into my room, his voice urgent. "Come with me." I sat up groggily. "Dad, what?" "Just come." Something in his tone made me move fast. We went outside, away from the base lights, where the crimson sky stretched endlessly overhead. He set up his telescope, adjusting it, his hands moving with shaky precision. Then he stepped back. "Look," he said. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I leaned in. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The stars had never felt real to me here. They were just scattered pinpricks in a sky that didn't belong to us anymore. But the longer I stared, the more I realized. They weren't random. They weren't just stars. They were shapes. Symbols. A message. I pulled back sharply. "Dad," I whispered. "What is this?" He didn't answer right away, just exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "They left it for us," he said finally. "Whoever moved us." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I turned my gaze back to the sky, my breath coming slower now. Someone had arranged this. A message so large, so impossibly vast that the only way to read it was to move an entire civilization into the right position. But what did it say? And more importantly, who was meant to read it? I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, Dad packed up his things, leading me back inside, but I didn't feel tired anymore. I felt watched. I felt like someone was waiting. Not for a response, not for us to understand, just for the right time. We were saved, but by whom, and will they ever return?